Okay, thank you everybody then for joining. This is part two of a three-part series of webinars that we're hosting with Nicky Perfect. This edition is called Actionable Steps for Behaviour Change from a Hostage Negotiator. On to the next slide, please, Jackson. Thank you. So just before I introduce Nicky, I want to make you aware of the interactive dimension to this webinar. That is the Slido tool that we're using. So Nicky has set this question for you to be thinking about and answering during the webinar. All you need to do is scan the QR code and simply enter your answer into the box and press send. And these answers will be reviewed by Nicky towards the later stage of the webinar. So I'm just going to give people a few moments now to get their phones and scan the QR codes, because this is the opportunity that you have now to scan the QR code. So I'll just give people a few moments. Great. And while people are doing that, I'm just going to now introduce Nicky again for those of you who weren't at the previous webinar. So today we're welcoming back Nicky Perfect for a follow-up webinar that she done for us in December. So don't worry if you missed that one. Nicky will recap it for you first, and then we'll send both parts to all registrants at the end. So as you may already know, Nicky was a hostage and crisis negotiator for 10 years as part of a career spanning more than 3 decades at the Met Police. She's travelled the world teaching negotiation and working with the government and international operations, and her work has been recognised with the British Empire Medal and an invitation to the King's coronation back in 2023. She's even wrote a best-selling book about her experience as a negotiator, so it's fair to say that Nicky really knows her stuff. Now, without behaviour change, any sustainable commuting policy, no matter how comprehensive it is, will not work. Convincing your employees to alter their habits before even arriving at work requires incredible communication skills and a compelling argument. So in this webinar then, Nicky will equip you with essential strategies for engaging in meaningful conversations with your employees, drawing on her extensive experience as a hostage negotiator and communication expert. She'll demonstrate how to apply proven communication techniques to inspire sustainable commuting habits. Nicky will show you how to effectively influence behaviour change and motivate your employees to adapt more environmentally friendly commuting practices. Now, please don't forget to add your questions using the Q&A button below, as we're going to have lots of time for questions at the end, so Nicky can help as many of you as possible, especially those who've attended the previous webinar. You may have already tried some of the techniques and suggestions which Nicky has made, so she'll be very happy to answer those questions and help you. So without any further ado, please take it away, Nicky.
Thanks, Sam. Thank you so much for being here, everybody, and thank you for having me back on this part 2 of free webinars. I'm just going to share my screen with you so that you have an idea of what we did in the last webinar. So this webinar today will start with a bit of a recap from last time for those of you that weren't here, but also for those of you that were here, just to give you a refresher, because I know some time has passed between those 2 webinars, and communication is a skill, and like any other skill, it's great to remind ourselves of what the tactics and strategies are, but also to practice as much as possible. This is also about you. So the next hour or so is really about you and your chance to ask me as many questions as possible. All of you will have individual tasks and challenges that you are facing, but many of them will expand across all of you, especially if you're working together on behaviour change and looking at changing how people travel into work specifically. Again, for those of you that weren't here, I always start every single presentation I ever do with this, addressing the elephant in the room, which of course is my surname. My surname really is perfect. As my dad always says to my mum, he was born perfect and she only became it when she met and married him. I apologise if you've already heard that joke, but I always say that joke in memory of my dad, who we lost in 2022, at every presentation I do. Let's have a look at a summary to start with then, the summary of what we did last time we were here. Many of you will know this phrase, that communication is a soft skill. And I like to challenge that and suggest that communication is actually a life-changing and a life-saving skill. In fact, I was going as far as saying that effective communication is the opportunity to either make a difference in your life or the life of another person. But what happens is we're generally not present. Most of our conversations are unconscious, what I would call tip of the iceberg conversations. So we have them, they're nice and safe, but they're not addressing the real issue. So for example, in your world, it might look like something along the lines of, okay, what are your biggest challenges to traveling to work on public transport? And you'll get a superficial answer, like it's inconvenient. Okay, well, what does that mean? And then we start to explore what inconvenient looks like. We'll go through a little bit more of that later on today. We looked at some barriers to change. Now, there are many, many barriers to change. We were just looking at some of the main ones that come up in conversation. First of all, we have our values and beliefs, and we did a whole session part around these values and beliefs because they're so strong. I believe that our beliefs drive our behavior in everything that we do. And so if we want to change somebody's behavior, we have to look at why they believe that what is happening is true to them in the first place. Convenience and habit. We all get into our own routines. We all have our own parking spaces. Even I don't travel very often to London, but I went there yesterday to do a training with a company. And I found myself looking for the same parking space in the car park because of my habits and my routines and my convenience. And I actually stopped and laughed at myself because I was thinking, well, this is interesting behavior from my own perspective when I'm not a regular traveler. What does that look like for other people? And in fact, I remember getting on the train once when I was traveling in to work, working in the Metropolitan Police on a day-to-day basis. And I'd get the train quite early, probably about 6:30 in the morning. And I was traveling with my partner and they'd gone to get coffee and I'd sat in the seat and the seat next to me was free. And in fact, the whole carriage was free. And somebody came and sat next to me. And I said, oh, I'm ever so sorry. My partner sat there. They've just gone to get coffee. To which she replied, well, you'll have to find another seat because I always sit here, which is very interesting and quite unusual behavior. Initially, I could feel my emotions rising, going, well, that's just ridiculous. And then I remembered that perhaps I just needed to sit and listen, and perhaps there was more going on in this particular person's life. But it's interesting how convenience and habit and beliefs drive our behaviors and how we will take over in an emotional state if somebody challenges that. Lack of viable options around change. So what can we do? How can we think outside the box? And I learned a lot about thinking outside the box in the world of hostage and crisis negotiation, because when you're dealing with people, and especially people that there is a perception that there is no control from your side and a perception from the other side that there is no control as well. When we don't have that control, or we feel like we don't have that control, like a lack of perceived viable options, then again, it can cause us to respond in an emotional way and we'll give pushback. And so it's harder to influence and persuade somebody when they're in that emotional state and they're giving pushback. So we have to look for viable options. And sometimes that will mean thinking outside the box around how can we work together? How can we collaborate to make life easier on your part whilst we're still achieving the goals on our part? And then we have, of course, the cost and effort of change, whether that's childcare, whether that's train fare tickets, whether that's parking at the train station, whatever that might be. How does that affect people and what are their true concerns? So we looked at beliefs and I asked this question: what happens when our beliefs are challenged? And I'd like you to start thinking about your own beliefs. Like the lady on the train, her belief system was she always traveled in that seat and that she wasn't going to move for anybody else for whatever reason. And I never got to the bottom of the reason, but for whatever reason, something was happening there that was causing that behavior. So what happens when our beliefs are challenged? And we looked at, very simply, the human brain being split into two parts, where we have the emotional side. And when we go into the emotional side from a big helicopter view, we either become aggressive. So we might start talking over people. We might start talking about people. We might start finding people that will make us right. So for example, if we are if we really don't want to change, we'll go and find other people that really don't want to change. So it will make us right, and then we can find facts that make us right. Or we might become a little bit more submissive, which means we'll withdraw from the conversation. We will become a little bit resentful because we don't feel that now we're involved in the change. So we don't feel that we're valued and validated as a human being. And then again, we start to push back emotionally. We start to be very negative, or we'll just internalize a lot, which can build up more and more resentment and more defense barriers. When we're in a logical state, well, this is where we can see the world from two perspectives. This is where we can listen to what another person is saying. We can offer our own opinion, our own belief system, but we're looking for a way that we can collaborate together. So it's far more logical, less resistant. We shared some words to avoid when you're building rapport with somebody, when you're showing that you can empathize with them. Here were some words that we looked at to avoid. I understand how you feel. Now, for those of you that weren't on the previous webinar, I would just ask you to start thinking about when someone says that to you, what's your immediate reaction? Mine personally is often, no, you don't. You have no idea how I'm feeling. You have no idea what's going on in my life, especially if there are challenges that I'm facing that you don't know about. So if I say, well, it's going to take me more time to come to work, and you're like, oh yeah, I understand how you feel around that. Well, no, you don't, because you don't have the running around of dropping the kids off at nursery. You don't have to get the dog to the dog sitter. You don't have to try and find somewhere to park where by the time I get to the train station, it's rammed because it's gone 9 o'clock, or whatever those challenges that the other person is thinking and feeling. When we say these words, we create a barrier, even if we don't want to. If it's unintentional, we create the barrier without knowing it. So these are just things to think about, to keep people on side, to build that rapport with them, to start gradually moving forward to that behavior change. Calm down is another one. If anybody becomes emotional or has an emotional conversation with you where they start to become quite angry, if we say calm down, we often get a negative response, a more aggressive response, or a more submissive response. I don't know about you, but when anybody ever tells me to calm down, I generally give the response of, come on, it's you. But maybe, of course, that is just me. Then we have the word but. We know the human brain doesn't hear anything before the word but. So if you're giving feedback to somebody, or if you're saying to somebody, I can appreciate how you feel, and then you say but, everything that you have said before the word but is negated, and they'll only hear the negative. So if I say to you, today is a beautiful, glorious day, but tomorrow it's going to rain, your brain will focus on the rain. If I say today is a glorious and beautiful day and tomorrow it's going to rain, now we hear both parts of the sentence. This is key in keeping rapport. It's simple, but actually quite hard. I use the word but straight away there. You have to be really consciously present and thinking about what words you're using. And then if you personally have a default, especially if you can't remember somebody's name, or you just have a default in language, which might be mate, love, darling, or sir, this can, of course, create resistance from the other person. Again, when we create resistance with another person, they don't necessarily tell us that's what's happened. It just happens in their head, unconsciously and consciously. The communication is actually quite challenging and quite difficult when we look at how we can create these barriers very quickly without intending to do so. Words to use instead of I understand are I accept, I expect, respect, and I appreciate. Again, when you use these words, don't follow them with a but, because that will negate all the great conscious effort and work that you're putting in. This is one of my favorite slides. I always share this because I just think it shows how well perspective can be used. Often we look at the world from our own perspective, so we might be quite tunnel visioned in what we're saying. And for example, if it's easy for us to use public transport to get to work, then we might be saying, well, it's easy to do because it's easy for me and I've done this all the time. I don't actually know what the problem is. And it can become a bit frustrating when people keep giving us challenges and we're like, I just want you to get on with it. And actually, when we stop and go, let me move myself to a position where I can see what it looks like from your perspective, then we start to recognize the concerns. That's when we can build a relationship of rapport and trust. And when people trust us, we know they're more likely to listen to us and they're more likely to be influenced and persuaded. Now, one of the biggest ways of building trust very quickly is to really listen. I'm not going to go into the listening modes today. That will be in the third webinar, which we hope you come along to, where we'll really delve into listening, what it means, how powerful it is, and what different modes we have of listening. Then we talked about predictive dialogue, and predictive dialogue is one of those aspects and tactics of negotiation and communication, which I absolutely love, because it's almost like you are reading somebody else's mind. And when you read somebody else's mind and are able to build that relationship with them through language, through reflective language and listening, what happens is they're like, wow, yes, that is how I feel. And yes, that is how I'm thinking. So let's just have a look at what we did last time. We did a poll very similar to the one we're doing today, where we asked the question, think about when alternate commuting is discussed with your employee, what's the biggest resistance to the change? And these were the words that came out in the Slido. If you haven't used the Slido, I would encourage you to do so, just because we can then make this webinar really pertinent to you and your challenges. And then we took the word convenience, because that was one of the words that was used more regularly than the other ones. And we just took a piece of paper, a whiteboard here, and we might well do it again today, but we just took the word convenience and circled it. And then we were thinking about, so what does convenience look like for other people? And we came up with, it takes more thought and planning for somebody to use public transport than it is to jump in their car and get to work. It's a perception that it's a waste of people's time. There is a perception that people don't have time to do this. And there are people's biases of what that looks like. And then we looked at they are busy. And then we circled they are busy and thought, well, what does they are busy really mean? So we were honing down on what's important to the other person. And we came up with childcare. So they are really busy because of childcare. So what does that again look like? Let's go down another layer. So I have childcare, which means I have to drop my child off at a specific place at a specific time and collect them at a specific place and a specific time. So that narrows my working day. So as an organization or as a leader, can we think outside the box of how we can work with them around their day? I'm not saying that you can, but is it an option? Can we get a more enthusiastic employee to work more efficiently and effectively by changing their start times and their finish times slightly? And when we do this, when we do something for somebody else, it's called the law of reciprocity. When we do something for somebody else, they are more likely to do something for us. So if people see that you are being more flexible, or that there's a way that you're trying to make their life a little bit easier, they are more likely to go, well, actually, I can work with that. And we call it collaboration. And when we collaborate with each other and work together, then it's a lot easier to get a good result for both parties. Then we looked at the power of because. Now, this is one of my favorite phrases, because there's so much research that shows that this works. I practice this almost daily. I have an 18-year-old in my life, so I definitely practice with them. When I'm running teams, when I want to implement change and I tell them the reason why we're implementing the change, they're more likely to come on board or to ask questions about it rather than to push back on it straight away. So it's the power of because. What are the reasons that something has to or is not going to happen? What is your because? And when we use that simple word and that simple phrase, it just helps other people's minds to expand on the reasons why this is actually happening, rather than we're just doing this. I used to work with somebody when I had my garage workshop, and he would always give me a yes or no answer. So I would go in and I'd say something along the lines of, Mrs. Smith needs her car back by 3 o'clock this afternoon. Will you have that done? And sometimes I would get a no, and that would be it, no. And when I got that no, I could feel myself getting a little bit frustrated. And I was like, well, that's a bit negative. Why are we just saying no? So I then just said back to the mechanic, because, and then I would get a fuller answer, a more detailed response, which then allowed my own personal brain to go, right, I understand that. I appreciate that now. Is there something else that we can implement that will make Mrs. Smith's life a bit easier, whilst also being able to make the technician's life easier so that we have the car done? You can't do that if you don't know what's going on, what the because is behind the rationale. And then lastly, we came up with a strategy called the 4Ps, which is a simple strategy for you to use when you have a difficult and challenging conversation. The first one is purpose. Know your purpose. What is your intention of that conversation? So, for example, in the world of hostage and crisis negotiation, if I'm talking to somebody that's standing on the edge of a building and they're making decisions about their life, my overall purpose is to get them down from the building and get them the help that they need. My purpose of my very first conversation, and negotiations and difficult conversations are normally a series of conversations. They don't often happen in one hit. So we build relationships, we start to get people to trust us, we have lots of dialogue, lots of conversations, lots of open and honest conversations where we're open to listening to concerns, and we're also open to giving feedback around how these challenges might be met and how we can help the other person. So my first purpose could just be to get the person standing on the top of the building to look at me. And that's my purpose of that first conversation. So what's your purpose? And start with your overall purpose, and then start with the beginning. Maybe it's just to open up the dialogue and start getting people to think about things in a different way. Start to explore things. You know, when people say, well, I can't do that, what part of it is the impossible? What part of it is factual? What part of it is a belief? And then we can start to talk about that. Then we have the plan for what ifs. What if you're met by an emotional response? What if somebody is just saying no, 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 no? What if you start to feel emotional yourself? What if, and so we go on. And it just takes a few minutes to think about, okay, well, what happens if that? What is my exit strategy? So if I'm having a difficult, challenging conversation and I can feel myself getting a little bit emotional, what's my exit strategy? Is it just to say, I really fancy a cup of tea right now, would you like one? Is it to just sit and listen? Is it to be honest and say, I'm finding this conversation quite difficult. It'd be great if we could just come back to it maybe tomorrow when we've both had a time to reflect on it. Whatever works for you, what's your strategy? Perspective. Perspective is key. I'll talk again about perspective, I'm sure, as I answer some of your questions. And we've also looked at the 6 and the 9, which shows how important perspective is. And then lastly, we looked at practicing, because practice does make perfect. Communication is a skill. Communication, like any other skill, needs to be practiced. So where's your safe space? Do you have somebody on your team that you can have a practice session with? And it might just be, can you read this email for me before I send it? Or it could be, can I have this conversation with you before I have it with the other person? I have a friend who runs a business, and we were doing some training together. And at the end, I just said, oh, is everything okay? Because it looks like you're a bit out of sorts today. And she said to me, well, actually, it's not. I've got a phone call after this. And the phone call, I've got to make somebody redundant, really, ask them to leave because they're not performing to the standard that we've discussed. And we discussed that. And I said, well, do you want to just quickly go through the 4Ps? And she said, yeah, that'd be great. And we went through it. And she read some stuff out and she was like, that is definitely not how I want to sound. So we changed it. And then she was much happier with it. And it took less than 5 minutes, but she was able to go into that conversation feeling far more prepared and coming across in the way that she wanted to, rather than in a way that was a bit cold and a bit unfeeling. So practice is key. And just get somebody that you trust to give you some feedback. So we're going to come to the questions now. I'm going to stop sharing. We're going to have a look at the Slido screen. We're also going to come to questions. Please put your questions in the Q&A. I will have a little look in there now and start to answer them. Thank you, Jackson. I've seen that you've put that back up there. Let me just... Right, so understanding, encourage, time, challenge, misinformation. Misinformation is key. this is what we do as human beings when the communication is not effective. Often we get stressed or feel out of control when there is no communication, or when there is some communication, but it's got misinforming us, or it's not answering the questions that we have. Now, I'm taking the misinformation that the misinformation is created by people talking about it. So if there's no other information that's coming out and they're getting misinformation maybe from their teammates, what they do is they live into that misinformation, and we start to go, well, it must be true because 2 or 3 of us are talking about it now. And before you know it, it's created this whole rumor control, rumor mill that has now become the truth. So it becomes harder to deal with that miscommunication. So that open dialogue right at the very beginning is key, and all the way through, because people like to feel in control. When we don't feel in control, it causes the emotional brain to kick in. Let's answer some of these questions. So on emotional and logical state, just in case it doesn't come up, and if it's relevant, techniques in a meeting to bring the room to a logical state, without obviously saying we've noticed everyone has been emotional in the past. I love that. And we want to bring everyone's logical thinking. Thank you, Chris. That's a great question. Yes. I'm going to say this first, just to remind everybody that it's not our job to change people. So there's a formula called E plus R equals O. E is the event that's happening, plus R is the response, our response that we give, equals the outcome. The only thing that we have control over is how we choose to respond. And I use the word respond rather than react, because react is emotional and is quite an unconscious behavior, and respond is a more logical state. Now, in this case, you can be very honest and almost do your predictive dialogue before you go in that you know that people have been emotional in the past. So we could say something along the lines of this. Thank you, everybody, for coming to the meeting. Now, I know that this is a very emotive topic, and that it can cause emotions to rise in each of us in individual ways. Now, I have noticed that when we're thinking very emotionally, we change our behavior a little bit. I find that people talk over people. Some people become a bit more submissive, so they're not participating. And what we really want from this meeting is to be able to listen to each other's opinions and beliefs, whilst also being able to share our own opinions and beliefs, so that everybody gets heard and we're in a position that we can move forward in the best way for the majority of people. I don't know if that would work for you, Chris. I hope it does, but also hope that answers your question. It can be hard. Of course, it can be hard. And it might be that you have to have a series of conversations, because it's really difficult to influence and persuade somebody when they are in that emotional state. So we have to build that relationship and take a bit of time and really listen to them. Please come along to the next webinar, Chris, where we're really going to go into listening and reflective language and how we can bring people back to that logical state. Next question. You use the word why, or does it need to be the word because? We are doing this because, i.e. details on a change, why we are doing this, or details on change, we are doing this because. My belief is that we are doing this because works better, because there's a lot of research in a book called Influence and Persuasion by Robert Cialdini that shows that power of that actual word because. And the research is around somebody in a photocopy queue asking to jump the queue and giving reasons why. I'm pretty sure we covered this in the last webinar, that power of because, but in answer to your question, my personal belief is that the word because works better because of all the research. And also when we use why, even when we say why we are doing this, why are we doing this, and then give the reason, that word why is quite powerful in itself and can sound accusatory and can also give the feeling of why we are doing this here, and you don't really have a say, if that makes sense. Great, Katrina, thank you for that question. Have you got any tips for when people simply don't respond, even after you've deployed all the tools we've discussed? yeah, I'm going to have to take you back to that one where, you know, we can't change people, we can only influence and persuade and make that journey a little bit better for them. I would probably have an honest conversation and just take them to one side. Now, there's a couple of things to consider around this. When you take people to one side, it can feel, especially if you're a leader, it can feel like they're being challenged and can feel uncomfortable for them. So first of all, I would think about timing of a conversation. And we're going to have an honest conversation where we're going to say to this other person, I've noticed that despite all the efforts that are being made to involve you in this change, you're not responding. And I'm wondering what's causing that lack of response. So we're going to have a nice open conversation and we're going to make it about the other person. We're going to use words like I'm wondering or I'm curious because it's less directive. So the other person doesn't feel like it's a parent-child conversation. So in transactional conversations, there is adult to adult, there is child to child, which is when the emotions are on both sides and we end up pretty much behaving like children and having emotional conversations, or there's the parent to child. We want to be having adult to adult conversations because it helps the other person to feel valued and validated and listened to, and that their opinion is worth hearing. So to make people more comfortable, perhaps take them for a coffee in a different place. Can you take them off site for a coffee? Would that be normal behavior? Can you find a quieter area in the canteen? I would say avoid office desk where there's a desk in between, so that you know, almost immediately when somebody sits down at the other side of a desk, if you are the leader and you've asked to speak to them, there is a perception, a belief that they may be running, that they are disempowered. And if people feel disempowered, then we're not going to have open and honest dialogue. So yeah, so you can't change people, but we can encourage them and we can say what we see. We just keep it factual. I've noticed in this meeting, or I noticed when I said this, that you did this. And I'm just wondering what that was about. And it might be that it's about nothing. It might be that we've misinterpreted. It might be that they're just processing. It might be that they have gone into submissive behavior. So we're just going to dig a little bit deeper by asking some big open questions around that and find out what's really happening for the other person. Again, please attend that third session because we'll go into listening and we'll go into reflective language in a lot more detail. I'm just checking the time, make sure that we're on track. Thank you. If you're chairing a meeting and someone comes along to purposely derail it, this is not the first time that I have been asked this question. If someone comes along to purposely derail it, right? You have a couple of options here. If you're chairing the meeting. So one is to get agreement at the beginning of the meeting, agreement about how that is running, how the meeting's going to run, and how long people have to talk, and that we're going to listen to other people. And we get buy-in from everybody right at the beginning of the meeting. So it might be that you as the chair would say, good afternoon, everybody. We've got 45 minutes in this meeting. We've got the agenda for this meeting. Anything off the agenda, please, can we discuss outside of the meeting? You might do it in an email before the meeting so that you have, this is the agenda. If you've got something to say about specific points on the agenda, please let me know before the meeting. And that's how we'll manage it, because we've only got 45 minutes and it's important for everybody to have their opinion heard and that we can listen to other people. Or it might be that you take a big swallow and you speak to that person outside of the meeting and say something along the lines of, I accept that this might be just my own belief system. I just want to discuss something with you about what happens in meetings. I've noticed this, and and then we note the behavior. So we keep it very factual and we note the behavior, whatever that is. Maybe they keep talking over other people, or maybe they disrupt the agenda, or they try to make it about their own agenda. And we can just say that I noticed in last month's meeting, when this was happening, you did this. And I'm just wondering what that was about, because I'm making a whole story up in my head that you're coming into the meetings to deliberately derail them. Now, it might be that they just don't feel heard. So can we also stop and look at the world from their perspective? So we'll look at the 4 Ps. What's your purpose of the conversation? Purpose of this conversation is to stop these meetings being derailed because it's annoying and frustrating and nobody else gets heard. So that's the purpose. What's the purpose of the very first conversation? If I'm going to highlight what I've seen, and I'm going to just say it, like, I'm wondering what that's about because, and now I'm going to take responsibility for my own thoughts and feelings, because I'm making a whole story up in my head that you're deliberately derailing the meetings. And I can't believe that would be true. Or we could do it another way. We could say, I just want to talk to you about the meetings. I've noticed in the meetings this, the behaviour, and I've been looking at the world from your perspective. And I'm wondering if you're feeling that you're not getting heard, or that you've got a point that you really want to discuss. And perhaps we can make more time for that at another meeting. We can put it on the agenda and give it more time, whatever that might be. There'll be a reason for their behaviour. And if we can find out what that reason is, then we can have a better relationships, and then we can also have better conversations in the future. But those conversations can be difficult, so use the 4Ps, and also give yourself permission to have the conversation. You don't have to be aggressive to be assertive. In fact, they are two very different things. When you're aggressive, it's coming from the emotional brain. When you're assertive, it's coming from the logical brain. I'm going to use a rude word. I apologize now for everybody on the call, but you don't have to be an arse to be assertive. And in fact, in the world of hostage and crisis negotiation, if you are, you will never get a result, because it's about people. We're all in the business of people. It doesn't matter what role we perform, and it doesn't matter what business we work in. At the end of the day, people buy from people. And if we can build relationships, then people are more likely to listen to what we've got to say. What are the best questions to ask to see things from someone else's perspective? So open questions are the best questions. The what, where, who, why, where, when, and how. We try to avoid why. We already talked about that, because it can come across as a parent-child conversation rather than an adult-to-adult. So we'll ask big open questions like, what's your opinion on that? Again, please come to the next session, because we're going to cover that in more detail. We want to collaborate. So we want to work together. So we will start to change our language from I and you to we and us, so that we're collaborating, and that's collaborative language. We'll start to ask people what their point of view is. So we could say something along the lines of, this is what I believe to be true, and this is how I'm looking at the world. And I'm wondering what your perspective is. What's your opinion? I'd be really interested to hear what ideas do you have, and get people to start to reflect back about what they're actually thinking. Or you could just ask, I'd really like to understand more about what your challenges are, and have that open dialogue. Thank you very much for that question. How can we apply these tips and practices to communications that aren't in person on an individualized? So in mass scale emails. So Daisy, this is a great question, because we know that barriers to communication come when we have physical barriers. So for example, if we were in a room together, I'd be able to see you now. I'd be able to get a feel for whether I'd answered your question in a way that you understood, or it had interpreted it in a different way. We'd be able to have that conversation, because I'd be able to look, and I'd get everything. I'd get words, I'd get your non-verbals, I'd get your body language, I'd get a feeling of just being with you. We have a screen here, I can't see you. So that makes that's another challenge. That's a barrier to overcome. And then if we're just communicating and we're trying to have this conversation by email, that again would be a barrier just to overcome. And then also if it was a mass email, that then becomes a barrier. So you can see already we've got like between 5 and 10 layers of barriers that we're going to have to get through to make our email impactful to a lot of people. So I would go back to the 4Ps, and I would start with, what's the purpose of this? What's the purpose of this email? Do we have to send out a big generic email? Is there a different way? Can we think outside the box of doing it in a different way? Would it be better for me to send out a personalized video to everybody, or are words on the page better? If I send out a personalized video, you get more of a feeler from me, you get my words, you get my tone, you get my belief systems a little bit. Maybe that would be a better way to connect. If not, and the generic email is the one that we've decided to go with, well, then how can we make that personal? So we do something like we've done here, where we've taken your biggest challenges and we've highlighted them. So we can see on the screen on the Slido that time is in a big green box there, big green writing. So I'm guessing that the majority of people here have said that time is one of the biggest challenges. So what is the biggest challenge from the world perspective from all of your employees? And there will be a variety, of course there will be, because everybody's an individual, but there will also be the ones that, like we've got here, the ones that are most important to people, that keep coming up. And the more that you talk to people and the more that you ask them the question, the more that you'll be able to see the pattern around what is this resistance to change. And so when I send out that generic email, I'm going to address that in the first sentence. I am going to say something along the lines of, let's just say that you're implementing the change next week, or you're having a discussion around it, or that change is coming, whatever that might be. So we're going to address that right at the very beginning, and say something along the lines of, you know, I'm aware that these are some of the issues that people are talking about, or that the majority of people are thinking about, and then we'll do them. And then I'd probably put in, I appreciate that this doesn't apply to everybody, and there may be other challenges that individuals are facing. So please please email me back if we haven't covered what you're thinking here. And then I would go into addressing those concerns on a mass scale. So you can still see the world from other people's perspective on a mass scale when you use the majority. There will always be outliers, those individuals, and maybe you can draw them in to have a different conversation. Okay, Daisy, so that's yours. Struggling to get buy-in from senior management, even for emission reduction projects who have a return of investment for energy saving every few months. Yeah. How can I move them from a habitual decision-making to a logical? Interesting question. Yeah, so there will be a massive belief system going on with your senior management team, whatever that is. And I would probably ask for that. I would probably ask around, well, what has to happen for this to happen? Or what does success look like to you? Or I'm curious as to the barriers that you foresee around this project. Because if we know what the barriers are, then we can start to address the barriers. In fact, we can do exactly the same that we did before around predictive dialogue. So we can get our little whiteboard or a piece of paper, we can draw one of the objections. So if you think about the world from your senior management's perspective, what are the objections? And I'd write a list of those objections, and then I'd go deeper. Okay, so what does that really mean? So if one of the objections is money, which it might well be from a management perspective, okay, so what is it about the money? That there isn't any. Is that true? That other projects have got more money. Why is that? What's the because around that? And then you can start to see what their decision-making process is. Or we can ask them what their decision-making process is and say something. I've just noticed that on this reduction project, that the decision always appears to be this. And I'm wondering what is causing you to make that decision, or words to that effect. Because you believe it's a habitual decision doesn't mean it is. They might well see it as a logical decision, and there might be a lot of other things that are going on in the background that you're unaware of. So do the 4 Ps, look at the world from their perspective, go deeper into and do like that cloud board. Okay, here is a resistance issue. What can I do around that? And when we're selling things to other people, it's about selling your idea or the project in a positive way to them, not you. So you might appreciate all the great things about this project, but what are the benefits to your senior leaders? It's like me going in and asking for a pay rise. What is the benefit to my senior leader if I'm asking for a pay rise? Why should I get a pay rise more than anybody else? What can I bring to the table? How can I make their life easier? Because if you can save them time and money and make their life easier, then the decision will be a lot easier. So have a little think about that. What is the best way to make someone respond to their logical state when they are entrenched in their emotional state? What is the best way to make someone respond? Yeah, so we have to buy time. We call it buying time, which means that we buy time for them to come from emotional state to logical state. Best way to do that is to listen actively. and to use reflective language. When you're able to do that, that person will gradually feel valued and validated. They'll gradually start to feel heard, and their emotional brain will start to move over towards the logical side. Now, as human beings, it doesn't mean we'll stay in the logical side. It might mean that we come back to the emotional state. It might also be a series of conversations. So it might be that you have the conversation and you can sense that they're getting emotional, and we'll say it. We'll just say, well, I just noticed when I said this, that you raised an eyebrow, or you looked away, or you folded your arms, and I'm just wondering if there's any meaning in that. And it might be that they start to use language and communication that you can sense is either aggressive or submissive. So we'll say it again, but we'll keep it factual. And we'll just say, I've noticed when I've done this, that I'm feeling some resistance from you. What exactly is causing the resistance? So we ask that big open question, and then we really listen to what they're telling us. So, oh, I can't do it because it take too much of my time. Okay, what exactly, and use the word exactly because, or specifically, because it hones people down. What exactly do you mean by that? Well, I have to do this and I have to do that. Okay, so that sounds like your mornings are really busy, and that managing to get everybody else's day in shape before you then leave the house and get yours in shape is causing you a challenge. Yes, it really is causing me a challenge. Okay, so what could I do to make your life a bit easier? So big open questions, make it about them, really listen to the answers that you're getting, because there will be something going on in their life that you don't know about that is causing the challenge. And if we can show them that we're appreciating that and listening to them and valuing and validating them as a human being, we're more likely to get a better response. But it takes time, and we have to really listen to them. Great. Have you got any advice for someone who gets easily frustrated when trying to have a persuasive? Yeah, guessing this is the struggle of having an emotional response even before the challenges have presented. Yes. Okay, great. What a brilliant question, because you are a human being and we're emotional. We know that our emotional brain is 5 times stronger than our logical brain. And so sometimes when we've got to have a difficult conversation, we're already thinking about it from a defensive perspective. And I'm like, I'm fed up with people just saying this, this, and this. Why can't you do this, this, and this? Remember, these are your beliefs that are coming out and not necessarily the beliefs of the other person. Some tactics for you. Brilliant that you've already recognized this and you're consciously aware of how you behave when you become emotional. That is the first step. The second one is, I call it the 90-second rule. It comes from a lady called Dr. Taylor Bolt, who's written a book, and she has done some research that if you can keep quiet for 90 seconds, that starts to dissipate those emotions through the body, that cortisol, the adrenaline, whatever you are feeling, it starts to quieten it down. And now if you start to keep thinking about it, and you'll know this, because if you think of a really difficult conversation that you've had, it will play on your mind, and it will cause you an emotion, and it will play on your mind because you keep thinking about it. And then that will create the emotion again. And then you'll think about it, and that will create the emotion again. So we have to break that. We have to break that cycle. So if we can keep quiet for 90 seconds and then consciously go, oh, I can feel myself getting emotional here. I'm just going to now listen. Let me just listen from a perspective of curiosity. So I'm going to change how I'm listening. I want to listen from a point of view of understanding and curiosity, and let my brain just settle down. So you're buying yourself time. Or if you need to take a break, and just say something like, oh, I could really do with a cup of tea now. Whatever your strategy is, or be honest and say, do you know what? I know I get emotional about this. I know I get emotional about this because it's really important to me. And we can have that honest conversation. There is nothing wrong about being emotional about something that's really important to you. It's just about how you manage that and how we have those conversations so we can make them logical. Really easy to do whilst we're sat here at 10 to 12. Harder to do when we're actually having those conversations. You know, I'd love to tell you that every single conversation I have, I nail it, because that would be a lie. I am an emotional human being and I get caught up in my own emotions, especially when I talk to my 18-year-old or my other half or my mum sometimes. And sometimes when I'm passionate about something, or I can see the benefit of a change and I can't understand why other people can't see it, I get frustrated. But that's about me, and I have to take responsibility for that. And so it's about recognizing who you are and how you behave, And what belief is driving that? What is that belief? Because when people challenge our own belief systems, it feels like they are challenging our opinion and challenging us, and that's what makes it harder. So yeah, just have a strategy that you can go, right, I know what's happening here. So I either need to have a break or I need to settle myself down. How to influence up when up isn't modeling the behaviors you're trying to get. Wow. Yeah, and Rachel, that is a challenging one. We can only do what we can do. So we can only model the behavior. We can only take responsibility for our own actions and our behavior. We cannot take responsibility for other people's actions or their behavior. And that makes it really challenging. So there's a couple of things you can do. You can accept it. So acceptance is key. When we accept somebody is who they are and they behave the way that they behave, makes life a lot easier to deal with them because we then don't get emotional. Or we can have a conversation around it and we can say, and I guess we'll keep it factual. We will not go into any emotions. We'll just talk about behavior. So it might be that you have a conversation around this, I've noticed that when this happens, and I'm just wondering what that's about. Or we can ignore it. We have choice. All you can do is what you can do, and you can keep modeling the behavior that you're trying to get your staff to model. And they will see that, and they will recognize that, and they will appreciate it, even if they don't say so. And even when they see perhaps the next level up not behaving in that particular way, they will look to you. So keep doing what you're doing, even when it's frustrating. How do you balance understanding people's perspectives versus not letting them off the hook? Yet to not change their behavior. For example, understanding how challenging people's personal circumstances are to traveling actively to work. Yep. But how do you continue that conversation to encourage them is still change their behavior, even though it might be hard? Changing your behavior can often require, there will be compromise without a shadow of doubt. In changing behavior, there will be compromise on both sides. And if you want that collaboration with that other person, where you're balancing that childcare, then we keep looking to find a way that works for them and a way that works for us. And it will take time because it's a new habit. And it might be that they change their hours in the office. It might be that they have to change their childcare. There will be compromise on both sides. But if you are seen to be listening to the other person and looking at ways that you can help them, because often what happens is I do a lot of coaching with people, but what happens is sometimes when we get caught up in something, we're like that and we can't see anything else. But when somebody asks us a big open question, like what alternatives do you have? People will say none, which isn't factually true on the majority of times. So we just want them to get their brain to think about other things, other ways, to have that aha moment themselves. So almost coach them into how can they make their life a little bit better? What can you do to make your life a little bit easier? Great. So I see there that you're looking to do some compromise. So what can I do to make your life a little bit better? Well, you could do this for me. Great. So now we've got a couple of reasons, but it will take a little bit of time. Okay. Can you confirm what the 4 P's are again? It is just a breaking situation down from top line purpose down to so the 4 P's are purpose, plan for the what ifs, perspective, and practice, the 4 P's. So they should be on the recording where we went through them, and they're definitely on the recording from the first webinar. Talking about techniques from coaching. Yes, you're absolutely right. Yep. Thank you. Yes. Skills of coaching and hostage and crisis negotiation are very similar. In hostage and crisis negotiation, though, we often have to get over the hurdle of getting the other person to speak to us. But yes, they're very similar techniques in coaching. Sam, I've noticed you've popped in. We're 5 to the hour.
5 minutes to go. Yeah, I thought I'd just come in to say thank you so much for joining us again, Nicky, and thank you everybody else for joining too. I hope you found it as beneficial as I certainly have. We'll be sending out recordings of this webinar and the previous one from December to everybody in attendance, and we'd love to have everybody at the final instalment, which I understand is about listening, Nicky. The link to part 3 is in the chat, so we'll be delighted if everybody could sign up for that now or once they've exited the meeting today. Nicky, I wonder if you wouldn't mind just giving us a few words about the final webinar, just to give people an idea of what they're in store for.
Yeah, certainly. So the final webinar, we are really going to look at listening. Now, I didn't know until I was in my 40s that there are 4 main different modes of listening. And we're going to start to get you to think about, how do you listen? In what mode are you listening? And why is it that you're listening in that mode? Then we're going to look at the power of reflective language, and to show people how you can get them from building rapport and empathy to getting them to trust you, to then getting them to listen to you by using active listening skills and reflective language. So more of what we've done today in helping you to build those relationships, specifically with those people that are giving you emotional responses, but also getting you to be more conscious about your communication, which will improve how you listen and communicate in general as well.
So thank you very much. Look forward to it. Thanks, everyone.